This week we're going to talk about designing the user experience. Before I start, I should point out that this is an absolutely huge area of research, both from an academic point of view and a marketing point of view. So this session aims to give quite a high level overview of the whole area of user experience, and then I'll also share some readings and interesting videos that can support this webinar. So today's agenda, we are going to talk about what is user experience design. We will present the business case for user experience design. We'll look at some of user experience processes. We'll talk about how we can measure its effectiveness and who needs to be involved. Before we start, it's worth pointing out that user experience is a huge area and it involves a number of different kinds of subtopics. So they include information architecture, interaction design, interface design, and also psychology and web psychology. So this guy, Don Norman, he coined the term user experience, and he coined it to encompass all aspects of an end user's interaction with, when he wrote about this, the company, its services, and its products. So in his book, The Design of Everyday Things, he used the term user-centered design to describe design based on the needs of the user. So leaving aside what he deemed secondary issues like aesthetics. So user-centered design involves simplifying the structure of tasks, making things visible, getting mapping right, exploiting the powers of constraint, designing for error, and so on. And when we talk about user experience, this is kind of what we think of as the holy trinity. So Google have their own design guidelines and where they say, focus on the user and all else will follow. Amazon, being the biggest e-commerce site in the world, they need to be customer focused. And you'll notice if you have an Amazon account, when you log in, the interface is very centered towards you as an individual. So based on previous purchase behavior, if you have created wish lists and so on. And then Apple, which is known for its beautiful design in terms of its products. Design is essential to everything that they do. So as far as they're concerned, design is absolutely core to their business. And when we talk about user-centered design, there are lots of different kind of phrases that you may hear me saying during this webinar or hear other people saying. So when we talk about user experience, that can be abbreviated to UX, but you may also hear people talking about user-centered design, or in kind of more in the fields of computer science or engineering, human-computer interaction. And I understand, but I could be wrong. The whole idea of human-computer interaction or user-centered design came about during the Second World War, when you had different kinds of systems engineers working with radars and different kinds of intelligence machinery that they may have required very specific training to use. So there came to be an understanding that things needed to be designed in a certain way in order to be usable by humans. And from our point of view as marketers, user experience is very much in line with customer experience. So when we look at user experience, we're thinking about building not just a website, but also a customer experience. So we will see as we go through this session that as well as following different kinds of design guidelines and listening to customers, that we still need to create an experience that needs to be a positive experience that people enjoy. UX it's a growing field. It's very much, perhaps some might say, still being defined. And creating a successful user-centered design website encompasses principles of human-computer interaction, but goes further to include disciplines such as project management, which focuses on planning and organizing a project and its resources, So this can include identifying and managing the life cycle to be used, applying user-centered design processes, formulating the project team, and guiding that team through all of the phases until the project is completed. User research also needs to be done, which focuses on understanding users' behaviors, their needs, their motivations, through observation techniques, task analysis, and other feedback methodologies. Usability evaluation focuses on how well users can learn and use a product to achieve their goals, and it also refers to how satisfied people are with that process. Information architecture focuses on how information is organized, structured, and presented to users, and interface design focuses on anticipating what users might need to do and ensuring that the interface has the elements that are easy to access, understand, and use to facilitate those actions. When we talk about interaction design, we're focusing on creating engaging interactive systems with well thought out behaviors. Visual design focuses on ensuring an aesthetically pleasing interface that is in line with brand goals and customer expectations. And then finally, content strategy, which I know you will have heard about in other classes, focuses on writing and curating useful content by planning that creation and delivery and the governance behind it. And then finally, accessibility focuses on how a disabled individual accesses or benefits from the site, system, or application. And back to this guy, Don Norman, he says, in order to achieve high quality user experience in a company's offerings, there has to be a seamless merging of the services of multiple disciplines, so including engineering, marketing, graphic design, industrial design, and interface design. And that kind of leads us on to the different kinds of people who would be involved in a web development project. And so that can include a project manager, a marketing manager, they may well be the same person, our copywriter, our editor, our graphic designer, an interface designer, and then some more kind of technical roles such as our database administrator, our network administrator, an information architect, and finally our web developer. Now in some cases, depending on the size of the business or the scale of the project, all of these people may be separate individuals, but in other cases they may in fact be they may certainly cross over with each other. So when we talk about user experience, we're talking about focusing on having a deep understanding of users, what they need, what they value, their abilities, and also their limitations. And it takes into account the business goals and objectives of the group managing the project. US best practices promote improving the quality of the user's interaction with perceptions of the site and its related services. And at the core of this is ensuring that users find value in what you're providing to them. And this is represented through what we call the user experience honeycomb. And he notes that in order for there to be a meaningful and valuable user experience, information has to be useful. So the site should be original and should fulfill a need for people. So it has to have a utility. It should also be easy to use. Nowadays, sites will need to be desirable. So that goes all the way down to the imagery, the identity, the brand, and other design elements that are used to evoke emotion and appreciation. And this is actually a huge area of research at the moment in terms of desirability and also in terms of web psychology. So there's a whole movement there of people who have done research in order to identify not just kind of what works and what looks nice, but how to influence people in their behavior online. And then there's also things like findability, so content needs to be navigable and locatable on site and off site, accessible to people with disabilities, and credible. So users need to trust and believe in what you tell them. So when we look at the elements of user experience, we need to start off with who's the product for, and think about the user needs, and everything else should stem from that. So when I say what's the product for, I mean what is the site for. So what are the user needs and the site objectives need to be very much in line. And then once we have identified those things, then we can start building on that and look at our functional specifications and think about content requirements. Then we get to information design, and that is where we are looking at the interface. So there are a number of different tools that we can use for mapping out our interface, and then designing our navigation. And then that leads into finally our visual design. So kind of visual design comes last, whereas sometimes I think there's a danger that people may think that visual design comes first and the rest follows from that. Um, Going back to information architecture, it's kind of where we think about how people will use the site, and we think about our user flow. So that goes back to our use case scenarios. So as well as creating use case scenarios, we can also develop flow charts of how somebody may proceed from one page to the next. We can sketch out our wireframes, which effectively is just a blueprint of what our site might look like. So that can be as simple as just drawing it out on paper, which would be what we would call a low fidelity wireframe. And then we can also create high fidelity wireframes and clickable prototypes, where we might have something that looks like a website, but it's just a clickable image. And we can see kind of where people will click and so on. So that leads us into our development cycle. And you'll see it's not completely different to what we've just been looking at, where the first thing we look at is our user needs. And then we will look at specifying something in order to meet those needs. Once we've done that, we can start putting our information architecture together. Then we can start mapping out our interaction design, where we look at our kind of our navigation and our page structure and so on. Then we can move into visual design, where the graphic designer gets involved and starts to make things look nice. And then finally, we can move on to coding and testing, usability testing, and quality assurance. And as we move through those things, it kind of makes sense that certainly in steps 1 and 2, market and user research is really important. So we really need to define who our users are. And then when we get to information architecture and interaction design and visual design, then we need the support of our user experience team to continue working with those users, because remember, the users need to be at the center of every part of this process. So as we start creating our information architecture and interaction design, we can still involve users by asking them to look at perhaps our wireframes, which are just drawn on paper, and ask them what they think. And then finally, when we get to visual design and coding and testing, that's where we're sort of handing over work to the more technical people on the team. So our developers, our graphic designers, and then our quality assurance teams, which may be similar people to the people who are on our user experience team. And I think it's important to identify the business case for user experience design because it's important from a number of different users. So user experience studies help site owners identify underperforming areas on existing websites in order to make improvements to the user experience. And this should have the effect of improving the business in a number of ways. And then for brand new sites, while, okay, fine, at the start of a project, there may be perceived delays or cost in terms of defining the project or the website, doing tasks around ideation of what the website would look like, doing market research tasks around our users, before we start getting into mapping out our designs and stuff like that. So that might seem costly at the start, but equally, as we move towards launch phase or going live, those costs are reduced, and also um, subsequent or potential subsequent costs are reduced as well, because if we don't involve our user and if we don't clearly map out the project, then our costs are just going to increase at implementation or post-implementation stage, because we may find that changes need to be made to the site, and they could be technical changes, they could be changes to do with content, or they could be graphical changes. And as well as costs, that can also lead to irritation then from managers involved in the project, from developers who may understand or may think that they've done exactly the work that they were asked to do, and maybe they have, so they may get upset at being asked to redo their work, from customers, obviously, because either being irritated at using a site, or maybe not even being irritated, but maybe just not converting, or just bouncing away from a site because it doesn't look or behave the way they expect it to. Um, and then I already mentioned developers. So let's take a look at reasons to embrace user experience. So number one, you can't really afford not to. And I'll repeat that again. You can't really afford to ignore the user experience, especially if the project involves selling something online. So if you can afford to do it, then you should really be optimizing your, not just the site performance, but it's your business performance, and it's that simple. Um, and the analysis and research involved in user-centered design, it helps increase understanding of customer characteristics, their needs, behaviors, and so on. So it enables a site to be developed which better reflects the diversity of their needs. User experience, this might be controversial, but it trumps brand and it trumps price. Um, so what use is a site or is a brand like Gap, for example, if there's no on-site search tool on a website like gap.com, which would probably have thousands of products. So I'm not sure if there's a Gap in Ireland, but I know I was in a Gap store in another country recently, and I think it had 5 or 6 floors and just tons and tons of different kinds of clothes. So you would expect that a Gap store would have a search functionality. And what use is discounting prices if a checkout process is poor and hemorrhages prospective buyers? So if people don't like the checkout process, either because it doesn't look trustworthy or they just find it difficult to manage, then we're not optimizing those opportunities for conversion, which really should be central to our business. And conversely, a startup that doesn't have a brand and average prices can get on the map by being more user-friendly than established competition. Number 3, identify competitor weaknesses. One of the great things, joy probably isn't the right word, but one of the great things about user experience is that you can test competitor websites to find out what makes them strong or what they're doing well, and test out their weaknesses. So where does the user experience start to become painful on those sites? So while you may not be able to access competitor sales data or get access to their analytics packages, for example, you can draw conclusions by benchmarking key elements of their websites. Number 4, gain competitive advantage with competitor websites in mind. If your landing pages or site search or checkout process are the best in the industry, then your website presumably then will be outperforming the rest of your competitors. And there's a bigger picture here. A higher than average conversion rate will ultimately help you to outbid competitors in Google AdWords. So user experience studies can help you convert as many prospective customers as possible. Again, with Google AdWords in mind, if you're paying to attract these prospects, then it becomes even more important to realize your return on that paid search investment. Likewise, if your site converts well, then affiliates will like sending traffic to your site, as the earnings per click they get from you, so how much money they make on average per referral that they send to your site, will be better than your competition. Focus on web standards. That's just user experience studies will test your website for errors as well as problem zones. So error-free code is important for various reasons, not least your Google rankings. So when we think of SEO, and the first thing you do in SEO is where you look at site-wide optimization to make sure that Google can access every single page of your site. That's kind of what we're talking about here. If you're developing a website, you're already spending money on design, but equally websites should be constantly tweaked for optimal business results. Even if you only update your site every couple of years, you'll spend a lot of money, so make sure you spend it wisely. And kind of conservatively, you could probably say that you can spend 5 to 20% of your design budget on user experience to be sure that a new design is in line with what customers want. So the user experience comes first before any of the changes. And whereas in reality, it kind of works the other way around. People make changes and then they test them. For bigger sites, a good user experience agency can probably deliver quite a return on investment. So, but in saying that, smaller businesses, they can still undertake user experience studies in-house if budgets don't stretch to user experience agency day rates. You don't need a user lab or eye tracking machines and so on. You can still formulate some tests and find some participants and interview them afterwards. And that kind of falls into the area of usability testing, which we will be covering next week. Another reason to embrace user experience or user-centered design is to manage costs. So we kind of mentioned this already. Testing effectiveness of a website during creation helps avoid errors in usability, findability, accessibility, and helps get a design right first time. And then equally, we also mentioned this one already in terms of managing people. The objective approach and process ensures that designs they're not overly influenced by internal stakeholders who might have very strong personal opinions of a site but aren't representative of customers. So those people can include, if it's a small business or indeed even a big business, you have a strong-willed managing director who thinks this is the way it should be done. I saw this other site and I think it's great and I want this site to be the very same. Or sometimes developers who may try and influence the direction of a project based on their own preferences. So they may be their own design preferences in terms of what a site should look like, or perhaps even their own ability, where they know they could deliver a site one way in a quicker amount of time than another way that may involve more complexity on their part and may involve them having to kind of learn some new skills and so on. And I guess from our point of view as marketers, happier users on our site equals or can equal a happier boss. And this is what we all want. Happy customers and I guess a happy boss. It's no surprise that in 2014, Fortune's most admired companies, the top three of them are Apple, Google, and Amazon.com. So those three that we mentioned in our holy trinity of user experience, that they're the top companies. So okay, Apple, they design phones and music players and so on. So we're not just talking about their website, but Google. Every interaction that we have with Google is on a screen. So whether it's our PC screen, the screen on our phone, or our tablet device. And it's the same for Amazon. And those companies, They're central, absolutely central to their business models is user experience design, and they recognize that. So let's look at UX design processes. So we already kind of showed one um, graph like this, which is this one, the development cycle. And this one isn't too much different. So it starts off with assessing the business requirements, um, looking at our target audience, and there's a number of ways to do that. As I mentioned here, interviews and focus groups, and there's some other ways that we will mention. Um, Defining the usability goals, accessibility standards, and so on. Moving into creation, where we look at our wireframes, and then we may usability test those wireframes, then refine those things, and then move into our building phase, where we start developing our front end. We can test those things out, review them, and then as we review them, we enter into the process again to develop that out. We focus on the user, as we said, and everything else will follow. So in order to focus on the user, first thing that we need to do is do our user research, and that kind of brings us back to the fundamentals of marketing, where we talk about our segmentation, targeting, and positioning. So everything needs to be positioned in order to serve our user, which is just another name for our customer. Remember that user-centered does not simply mean that design is based on understanding of users' needs, characteristics, and behaviors, but it means that users are involved throughout the design process. And the design process can be iterative. It's long been recognized that user interfaces should be designed iteratively in almost all cases, because it's virtually impossible to design a user interface that has no usability problems from the start. Even the best usability experts can't design perfect user interfaces in a single attempt. So a usability engineering lifecycle should be built around the concept of iteration. So when we kind of break that down to its most simplest parts, we've got design, prototype that design, evaluate it through testing, and then go back to design again. And it's a simple cycle like that. And depending on the kind of business that you're working in, so if this is a brand new business, particularly if it's a brand new online business, the research probably needs to be done to identify the needs of our users. So we've got kind of learn, build, and measure, versus a more mature business that may have a marketing department and have a very clear understanding of who the customers are. So for those kinds of businesses, maybe we can start at the build stage, measure, learn, and adapt. When we think about our users, there's a number of questions that we need to ask. So who are our important users? Why are they accessing our site? How frequently are they going to visit our site? What experience or expertise do they have, if any? Where are they coming from? Can they read our language? What kind of information are they looking for? How they want to use that information? And that can come down to read it on the screen, print it, or download it. What type of browsers they're going to use? How fast will their communication links be? So depending on where they are, will they have access to broadband, or will they be visiting a site over a phone line? So, okay, fine, that may not be as important nowadays, or if the visitors are coming from Ireland, but it may still be important in some jurisdictions. And also, how large a screen or window will they be using? Because with mobile in mind, people are just accessing content now in so many different ways, and it's not all just from their PC, which maybe up until a few years ago may have been a computer terminal in the office, or in the office at home, or in the corner of the kitchen or something like that, whereas now people can look at your screen from a whole range of devices. From an organization point of view, pre-existing marketing segmentation and the value of different visitors can influence the balance of content being created. And to practically accommodate the range of behaviors, we need to identify groups of visitors with similar characteristics and their relative importance to accommodate these groups. So when we do that, we have a number of different tools that we can use. We can create web design personas. We can look at audience types and we can break those down based on their characteristics, their intents, their behaviors. And then we can also try and look at audience motivation and behavior. So in terms of our audience types, um, we can break those down in terms of, okay, are they new or existing customers or visitors? Do they have any purchase history? What's their intent? So why are they on our site? Are they here to find information? Are they here to complete a transaction? Are they just comparing prices against somewhere else, and so on? And from a B2C point of view, so we can break them down in the traditional ways based on gender, geography, lifestyle, where they are in terms of the buying life cycle and so on. So when we create personas, we're modeling personas of site visitors, and it's a powerful technique for helping to increase usability and customer centricity of a website. So if you think of your Facebook profile, it has a name, it has a picture, it might have a bit of background on where you work and what you do, and most importantly, it includes your status and wall posts, which are likely to uh, possibly betray your expectations and frustrations, hopes, motivations, and apprehensions about your daily life. And it may sound crude, but you can think of a persona basically a bit like a Facebook profile for a representative typical user, where all the status updates relate to the context within which the new website, service, or product is going to be used. So their job, their home, their plans to book a holiday, etc. So a persona it's an archetypal user. And the design goal of personas is just to develop a customer-centric content and experience for our different visitors. An important thing to remember is that web design personas, they're not made up. They're based on data collated about real users. So I know this probably isn't as important to the part-time students, but maybe for some of the full-time students who maybe aren't familiar with the idea of a persona. Creating a persona is based on data collected about real users through interviews, observation sessions with existing and potential users, surveys, user testing sessions, and perhaps experience that project stakeholders have with customers. So they are things that we can possibly manage out ourselves as digital marketing managers, but also there are tools available where that can help us build out these profiles. So one tool, for example, is called Kantar NetQuest, and I know that we did have access to it last year, and I will follow up with Theo to see if we have access to it again. And if we do have access to it, I will put up the username and password on to Moodle, and I will also share a recorded webinar that a lady called Emer Faulkner did last year, where she gave an overview of how to build out one of these web personas. The goal of creating a persona is to identify patterns of behavior. So each type of user for a site will go to form a persona. It's also worth pointing out that while market segmentation is a valuable tool within the market profession for categorizing a market by demographic and forecasting the likelihood to buy and therefore the commercial viability of a proposed product or service, but it's not quite the same as a web design persona, which helps inform what it is that this proposed product or service should actually do based on the recognized needs of the user. So in this example here in our image, we've got someone who wants to build a site about food, but then, okay, you've got the foodie on the other end that's very interested in finding out about, okay, what kind of fruit and vegetables are in season. So we kind of need to think about our personas, kind of motivations and why they're going to be looking at our site. So a basic example of this would be on any of the banking sites. I think it's the same on Bank of Ireland. So you go to the home page and you've got this option here of saying who I am, and we've also got these tabs here so we can log in as somebody who just wants to access their personal current account versus the business that may have a number of different banking facilities with the bank. So immediately once we get to the home page, we can click on one of these things and then we can be drawn into a process that's designed specifically for that persona. There are different methods for identifying some of these things. So we can usability test competitor websites. Our test participants should ideally represent our target audience, but we can also usability test the sketches and wireframes of our proposed new site as well. When we think about behavior types, we just need to remember that people follow different customer journeys. So an effective site design needs to allow for different types of customer behavior according to their persona and their journey. So what do we mean by that? Well, there's a difference between a first-time visitor and somebody who's visiting the site specifically to complete a transaction. So a first-time visitor, they're motivated by finding new information about a product or a service or something like that. A repeat visitor might actually be comparing suppliers or comparing prices with somebody else, versus a purchasing visitor they've made the decision to purchase. They just want to get to the site, and we just want to help them get through that transaction as quickly as possible. And through developing tailored content for these different kinds of users or visitors, we can decrease bounce rates on the sites and increase our opportunities for conversion. Buyer behavior types, so as we said, they may differ depending on their position in the buy cycle. So first-time visitors versus purchasing visitors, their customer journeys, their decision-making process, their primary navigation mode. So have they searched, gotten to the site via search and landed on a specific product page, or have they browsed to the site, maybe because they've seen an advertisement somewhere or somebody told them about the site, so they may land on the home page. So that's our trigger factors. And then how receptive they are to marketing messages. And as I mentioned already, there's a whole plethora of research around web psychology and how to influence people once they're on a site. And some of those things are great just for understanding how people behave, but then equally, let's call it, there can be a dark side to those things where we can use those things to influence people to do what we want them to do. So just a graphical representation of some of that stuff, the person, their stage in the buying cycle, and you may recognize something like this from just reading about marketing. So we've got our people who are unaware, people who are aware, all the way down to people who are at the evaluation stage or are ready to purchase. And there are different digital marketing techniques to reach out to some of those people, and some of these things fall outside of what we're talking about now, but are still interesting to look at. So somebody who's looking at for a supplier search, so they know what kind of product they're looking for, so they may go directly to a search engine, and they may arrive at your site there. So when we spoke earlier on about web usability and following good protocols, that's kind of what we're talking about to help people land on your site. And then to help people evaluate and select a product, then that's where our content becomes really important and what our site actually looks like. So this guy in 2004, I think this was an e-consultancy report, which I don't have, but I'll try and dig it out, where this guy, Mike Baxter, identified kind of 4 different kinds of people based on their level of intent. So he talks about a tracker, which is somebody who knows exactly what they want, and they're just looking at your site to check for price, availability, delivery time, etc. So we may need to think of those people in order to pre-define those kind of things. So we can say, okay, does our website have the functionality to allow people to check price? Are we displaying availability of products? How long it will take this product to be delivered to somebody, and so on. Versus a hunter, so they know approximately what they want. So the example there would be somebody who knows they want is a kind of product, like a digital camera, but they don't know what kind. So we need to be able to help those people along. And that can be simply through content and crafting our content in certain ways to be able to answer their questions. Then we've got the explorer, so they don't know what they want, they're just browsing. It might be somebody looking on Amazon or something like that. They know they want to buy maybe a present for somebody, but they're not sure exactly what type. So with that in mind, a site would need to have really good content, and also we need to think about engagement tactics to get that person to come back to the site. So, do we want them to sign up to our email newsletter? We're going to have social media icons to encourage them to interact with us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and so on. And then there's always those people who just land on our site through a SERP by mistake. And they're kind of the reason for high bounce rates on lots of sites. But again, we can still think about having really good content there to try and keep those people on the site, or at least keep the site in mind so that they may bookmark it or visit the site again sometime. So that kind of brings us on to content, where we would say interfaces, no matter how well designed they are, they're mostly words, and people can get tripped up by small things. So the fastest way of getting our interface right is with the right content. And it's always in any of the web projects that we have worked on here, preparing content has actually always been the most difficult challenge. It hasn't actually been around design or any kind of technical implementation. It's actually the content. And sometimes for us as digital marketers, depending on our role in the process, so certainly if we're on the agency side, we may not be the people who are preparing the content, and we may just be providing guidance and advice on preparing that content. So that can be a difficult thing to manage out. But if we are on the client side, then as digital marketers, we can kind of think about, okay, well, how can we prepare this content in order to fit into this design that we've created. So moving beyond our personas and behavior types, once we've identified those things, then we can start with simple things like sketching and wireframe. So we mentioned already that a wireframe is a blueprint of a site and what a site could look like. And we wouldn't just wireframe a home page. We might also wireframe if it's an e-commerce site, a category page, a product listing page, a product page, the shopping basket, the payment page, and so on. And once we've done all those things, so here's an example of a wireframe, we can then go back to our target users. So we may have a panel of people and we can say, okay, what do you think of this wireframe? So it might just be something that we've drawn up, and we can say to them, if this was a website that you were going to use, what would you click on to point to the bit of this page that you would click on? Or what do you think of this design? Or would you even know where to click, and so on. So and based on that, we can create new wireframes and kind of go back and forth like that until we've identified an optimal layout. Please excuse the typo about graphic design. I do know how to spell graphic design. Ideally, it's great to have your graphic designer and also your developer involved early on. So if we do run some testing on our wireframes and our sketches, it's great to get the graphic designer involved there, because it gives them a feel for your ultimate design rationale. And something worth just kind of pointing out, because it's interesting, is that good design kind of tends to go unacknowledged when you are testing. So if people actually have nothing to say, or if they don't really comment about the design, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because it might just mean that the design works, and it's as simple as that. So people might not necessarily comment to say this is a beautiful design. They tend to comment more on things that they find irritating or frustrating, because only somebody, sort of a trained person or somebody who has an eye for design, will point out if they think that something is really well designed. And finally, we get to our build and launch phase. So we go through that iterative process back and forth with our sketches and wireframes, and we get to the point where we can build and launch our site. So Ideally, when we hand over our designs, there should be a shared understanding between the UX designers, which may be us as digital marketing managers, and our developers. And so we mentioned graphic designers being involved in usability testing, but ideally developers should be able to view that usability testing as well. Why? Because it gives them an understanding of the rationale behind design decisions. And in some cases, you might have a developer who's great at C++ and Java and all sorts of things, but they might not actually know about design guidelines. And also, one of the things about design guidelines is that they may not necessarily be contextual. So we've got things, so a design guideline would be something like design for consistency. But it might be hard if somebody knows that, but what does that actually mean in practice? So it's good for developers to sort of be able to understand the rationale for different kinds of design decisions. And it also kind of gets them involved in the process, and it stops them having kind of undue influence over the process. So let's take a look at kind of user experience guidelines or good design guidelines. So these are Google's ones. I've shared a link there, and I think I shared a link in Moodle as well. So their thing is, they're familiar. They're a familiar example of a company that has adopted a user-centered approach to developing its site experience, and that's kind of led to its long-term success. And when we think about Google, if you navigate to Google, generally you've just got the word Google and you've got your search bar, and that's it. Because if somebody goes to Google, they just want to search for something. So like they have really made that absolutely as simple as possible. And these design guidelines that they have developed, they're kind of principles that would be familiar to anyone who's involved with web design, from commissioning point of view to the implementation point of view. But let's kind of move beyond those and look at some other design guidelines. First thing to point out is that design guidelines, they kind of are common sense, and they can be learned by experienced designers. I would say beware sometimes of developers, because there are times where they may know how to create functionality, but they don't know necessarily how to design. So it's very important that we revolve back to, number one, focus on our people, our users, and their tastes, behaviors, and preferences, and so on. And then also have an understanding of usability principles. And sometimes you may hear people talking about those things as design rules or heuristics or design guidelines and so on. Basic ideas are the same, as they all come from the same kinds of underlying concepts. Again, I would just say beware of developers who know how to create functionality versus knowing how to design. Here's the thing, despite we can only do our best with our user research and our iterative design and so on. But if we go back to industrial designer or Henry Ford, where he said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. If he'd have listened to that, he never would have developed his motor car. So while we can follow our rules and our design guidelines and stuff like that, so what there are laws and principles, we still need to use our own insight and our own good judgment, and there's still definitely a skill and an art involved in good design. So when we think about it, attractive things really do work better. So which one of these products would you think works better? And the reality is it's obviously it's the iPhone. And also when we look at kind of big companies like Nike and stuff now, there really is a move to creating beautiful design, really nice content. So while if we kind of go back to this stuff, our heat maps, and people look, at the very top of the screen, and that's where they need to find the content that they expect to see, that probably doesn't follow through here to this design here, where we've got this huge piece of digital real estate here, where there is no content. We just have this very nice image. there in the middle. So we do have our navigation menu at the top. Um, so it's broken down into user categories: men, women, kids, sports, and so on. Um, but it's probably okay for a company like Nike to do that. Same again for Adidas. In mentioning beautiful design, so this company here is it's called Zero.com. It's a really big, quite a successful startup company. I think they're based in the States, um, and they create accounting software, online accounting software. And so their website gets updated from time to time, but it's always very attractive. And again, they don't have all of there's lots of content there that maybe they could have, but equally, we've got these two buttons here where we've got 2-minute overview where we watch the video, or if we're ready, our call to action button, try zero for free, or try zero for free down here. And chances are, if somebody is searching for online accounting software and they land here and they see this try zero for free, maybe they don't need to read all sorts of content. They have the opportunity just to try it for free and put in that time to find out if this is any use or not. So that's against this an Irish version of an online accounting tool. Now, I don't know much about online accounting, and these two different tools may have lots of different kinds of features and functionality, but if you look at both home pages, this one certainly provides more information, but I don't know about you, but I know which one of these I would prefer to certainly sign up for the free trial with, or which one I would make an assumption would work better, would be functionally better for me. So that kind of takes us to kind of beyond design guidelines, where we kind of look at, okay, well, what actually works for motivation, and we're getting into sort of psychology then, as opposed to sort of technicalities. Less frustrating and hopefully more pleasurable. And then beyond that, then there's increasing motivation and psychology and stuff like that. And I will share some papers with you about that sort of stuff. So that is the end of this evening's lecture.